Welcome to the sixth webinar on energy and transport as part of the Space for Critical Infrastructure series. My name is Margarita Crisaki. I'm the Communication and Project Officer for Nereus, and today I will moderate this webinar, which is about how space can support the green and digital transition of transport and energy that are linked with critical entities, and now more than ever with the well-being of their citizens. Today it's going to be a very rich webinar as we are going to discuss with our esteemed speakers a few examples on how this can be ensured through the use of space. And for this reason, you may use the chat as you see below on your screen and pose questions to the speakers. We are constantly monitoring, myself and Cornel. Before I invite our first speaker to our panel, I would like to mention that the series are organized jointly by Nereus and EURISI. Nereus stands for the Network of European Regions Using Space Technologies, and our main mission is to promote the use of space technologies, the benefits of space technologies for the European regions. From the side of EURISI, I would like to invite Cornel to share a few words about the organization, and then we dive into the discussion.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot, Margarita. So indeed, very happy that we have this session again. So organized jointly together with Nereus and the EURISI. So we are EURISI is a non-profit association. We're based in Paris. We're gathering space agencies and organizations with a focus on bringing the benefits of satellite services to wider society, and so we really try to raise awareness of what can be achieved with satellite imagery and other technologies for different sectors, and especially in this series, it's a focus on critical entities, critical infrastructure. So I think we can jump today into energy and transport.
Thank you so much, Cornel. Now it is our great pleasure to have here with us today MEP Lucas Mandri, member of the European Parliament, Shadow Rapporteur for LIBE Committee and Rapporteur for the Committee on Foreign Affairs at the European Parliament. Before I give you the stage, MEP Mandl, I would like to briefly remind to our audience, and maybe going back to the discussion of our first two webinars on the introduction of the directive, that the two main novelties of this directive on the resilience on critical entities proposed in 2020 by the Commission, it's first that it extends to 10 sectors, and this is why we have the 10 webinars. And the second is that it comes with a shift in focus from protection to resilience, meaning to make use of infrastructure as well as on its supply and its supply chains and processes. As we know, last summer, it reached the political agreement by the European Parliament and the Council, and now it's subject for formal approval by the co-legislators that they are negotiating the final text. Now, MEP Mandl was one of the rapporteurs, issued an opinion in 2021 on the proposed text. MEP Mandl, we look forward to hearing your views on this important topic with great interest. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much to all of you. Good morning from the European Parliament premises here in Brussels. Thanks for your interest and thanks for the opportunity to have this exchange today on this important matter. I think it is an important matter because, and we must never forget about that as a basic question, because our societies are so mature today, our economy is so developed today, technology is so complex today that, of course, as we are at this stage of civilization, I would say we are also vulnerable in terms of our critical infrastructure. That is why we have to take properly care of our critical infrastructure and secure it as best as possible for regular times, as well as we had to learn this year for war times on European soil. And this is why I'm happy that after less than 2 years, actually, we will decide in the plenary of the European Parliament on the Resilience of Critical Entities Directive. And this is something I want to highlight, I also want to spread as a message. While the Resilience of Critical Entities Directive regards in the first place to physical infrastructure, we also have the NIS2 directive in place, which regards to digital infrastructure. And both fields are, of course, strongly interconnected. We must not forget about that as well. In the legislation, we have this distinguished approach, but of course it's interconnected, and we have to see it also holistically, also in terms of security for Europeans and Europe, and also in terms of the competent authorities and entities and companies who are affected by these developments. When looking at the two legislative proposals, we first need to distinguish, as already mentioned. And having said this, physical and cyber threats are very much interlinked, as mentioned, and therefore it was of utmost importance for us during the negotiations to use the same definitions and to avoid contradictions. Already back in 2008, so that's already nearly 15 years, the EU legislators agreed on a directive that aims at protecting critical entities, even though the scope was limited to only transport and energy. And this is one of, I would call it a swift of paradigms now, that we have broadened the picture very, very much to many different fields. I had the privilege to talk to the very competent advisors of Commission President Ursula von der Leyen during the Strasbourg week of the European Parliament. And we again emphasized together that we have now this, I would call it a 360 degrees view, the holistic view, not only as the old legislation said on transport and energy, but also on many other fields like space, as already mentioned. And what I wanted to include into the directive, which actually also worked for me as a shadow rapporteur and the rapporteur for the opinion of AFET, was to include the food supply chains in our understanding of critical infrastructure, as well as the distribution in the health sector. Frankly, I was not expecting a war to be waged on this level as we experience it on European soil now, and the importance of protecting food supply chains due to that. I amended it due to different reasons before the war started, but due to the war, we see how important for not only Europe, but also for other parts of the world, food supply chains matter, and why it is important that we have included them into that directive. In total, we widened the scope to altogether 11 critical sectors. Besides the already mentioned sectors, we also have banking, financial market, drinking water, wastewater, digital infrastructure, public administration in place and included here, as well as processing and distribution. We're looking at the challenges we had to face in the past years, namely the pandemic and the already mentioned war of Putin, Russia against the free world. We need to focus much more on the protection of critical entities overall. As mentioned, also in the fields that reveal their importance due to the war. And we can expect hybrid warfare, as it is called, to be waged against us, which has been waged against us already before February 24th. And I also want to share with you one last point in that introductory note. And this is about confidence in our state systems and confidence in our European Union structure from the side of small and middle-sized enterprises, of businesses entirely, when it comes to cyber attacks. Because we all know, if we are frank and if we open our eyes, that there are businesses attacked by cyber attacks which are considering whether to go to the police, to trust into the state persecution on that, or to pay for the criminals who do the cyber attacks, are not in terms of attack and division like state actors and terrorist actors, but in terms crime and organized crime. And what we have to create is a clear atmosphere of a state that secures businesses, secures the whole economic environment in terms of resilience also against cyber attacks. And this is something which is not directly with regard to physical infrastructure, but a good example for the interconnection between the two legislative fields in order to protect infrastructure in its entirety. These are a few thoughts from my side. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to our today's Thursday morning exchange. All the best.
Thank you very much, MEP Mandl. It's really highlighted from your side the urgency to have this directive, and indeed we can see that the need more and more increasing due to the geopolitical challenges such as energy crisis, cyber attacks, and so on. Just to inform our audience that once the directive is published in the official journal, will enter into force 20 days after the publication, and member states then can transpose the element of the directive into national law within 21 months. That we expected in November or December, right, to be published. Thank you very much for your valuable comments again, MEP Mandl, and your presence today. And please stay with us for the rest of the webinar for the discussion with the audience and the other speakers. Sorry, before I give the floor to our next speaker, I have a question for you, which is linked with your presentation. And maybe I can pose it now and keep the others for the audience at the end. How do you see the role of regions and space in the context of SER, of the directive? You mentioned a few thoughts. Maybe if you would like to add something more on that.
Thank you. I would say in the past weeks we have seen the explosion of Nord Stream 1. As an example how vulnerable critical energy infrastructure facilities can be to physical threats in that case. What happens to a gas pipeline could happen to an electricity generating plant or power supply lines, LNG terminals, or similar facilities. Physical threats might be caused by terrorists, foreign malign powers, or by natural disasters as well, such as thunderstorms, floodings, or earthquakes. So our directive requires critical entities to establish contingency plans to prevent incidents from occurring and to ensure the adequate physical protection of sensitive areas and facilities, such as through fencing barriers, perimeter monitoring tools, employee security checks, and access controls. We should not assume that the security situation in peaceful times is the same as during war situations. And we see now on European soil how quickly the overall situation might change. Critical entities are built to remain for decades. And this is something we have to keep on our mind, that sometimes we have to act quickly on a day-by-day basis, but the perspective is very sustainability oriented when it comes to the resilience of critical infrastructures.
Thank you very much, MEP Mandl, and we will come back to you for more questions. Thank you very much. So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Antoine Half. He's the co-founder of Kairos. It's a leading advanced energy company that helps traders, investors, operators, and governments to make better decisions. Mr. Hive, we are very interested in sharing with us how satellite solutions supported your use cases in the sector of energy distribution. And for the audience, it's from this part onwards, we are going to hear concrete use cases on energy and transport. And feel free to pose your questions. The stage is yours, Mr. Hive.
Thank you very much, Margarita. Thank you very much to UEC and Nerus for hosting me today. I'm very honored by the invitation. So let me tell you a little bit maybe about Kairos just in a couple of words before I start delve into the the specific use cases. Margarita, if maybe I could have the slides up.
Yes, of course. Cornel, would you like to share or I share?
Margarita, please feel free to share the slides.
Okay, give me one moment.
Kairos is a company that we created about 6 years ago. It's going to be 7 years in April. And the purpose of Kairos is to use new technologies, particularly satellite imaging, but also geolocation devices also provided through satellites and social media posts and all kinds of new sources to shed transparency about the energy markets and also about climate impacts, which until now have been very much opaque. So we use satellite imaging and other things with artificial intelligence, machine learning to assess crude oil inventories, oil demand, supply, natural gas, but also the climate footprint and climate risks. So on the next slide, we today have more than 90 customers, which include most of the largest players in the energy industry, in finance, in insurance, and many relevant industries. We monitor more than 200,000 assets around the world, and we use for that many kinds of inputs, including, as I said, a lot of satellite imaging. We heavily rely on detections from the European Space Agency, particularly the Copernicus satellites, but we also use input from NASA or from commercial players as well, depending on the needs and the circumstances. We have about 160 employees of 24 citizenships or 25 citizenships. So we're pretty agile, but we have already a fairly significant footprint in the industry. Not a climate footprint, though. On the next slide, if you can switch to the,
yes,
to the slide. So we are, in fact, many startups in one, in the sense that we monitor many verticals and many aspects of the climate and energy footprint. I think one way to describe the products that we offer is they fall into three main categories, three main buckets, if you'd like. On the one hand, the first one is we monitor the climate impact. We monitor methane emissions. We developed the first platform that monitors super emitters globally around the world in a quasi-continuous mode, relying mostly on Sentinel-5P from the European Space Agency. But we also track carbon emissions, also on a daily basis, using different technologies, again, satellite imaging, but different approaches. We also monitor carbon offsets, that is particularly nature-based solutions, forestry, which we track in many different ways with a great degree of granularity, but also comprehensively around the world. And it's not just afforestation, deforestation, but forest degradation and the precise amount of carbon embedded in forestry and other vegetation assets. Second bucket is climate risks. We track flood risks. We monitor wildfire risks. We monitor drought conditions. And when a flood or wildfire happen, we can track them in real time and very quickly assess the amount of damage. So this is critical for prevention. This is critical for preparedness, but also for resilience and damage assessment and repairs, and obviously for insurance purposes. And finally, the third bucket I would identify is the energy mix itself. We track the development of renewable solutions, renewable energies in real time. For example, we track the deployment of solar farms right now in the US and soon in the rest of the world. Solar farms, as you know, there's many thousands of projects that have been announced. Many are heavily delayed. Until now, there was very little transparency about the scope and the timing of these delays and the bottlenecks in the industry. So we track this in real time using, again, satellite imaging and also geolocation devices. The same technology is applied to wind farms, hydrogen deployment, but we also track the incumbent fuels, oil, which we still heavily rely on as a society. We track inventories, we track supply, we track demand using different approaches. We try the same for natural gas and LNG and for coal. So on the next slide, I will propose in these brief comments four case studies, four use cases that particularly apply to the monitoring of critical energy and transport infrastructure in Europe. The next slide. So I start with railroads, and railroads is really an application. Our railroad monitoring technology is really an offshoot of our wildfire risk monitoring solution. We have developed a very unique platform that tracks wildfire risks around the world with a very fine resolution, 50 meters, and we input in this model 20 different factors that affect wildfire exposure, risk exposure, and behavior. This includes topographic features like the elevation of the slope, vegetation, weather, climate conditions, etc. And on the next slide, this can be applied to monitoring railroads, and we currently have a major project with the French railroad network, SNCF Réseau, to help them monitor railroads, rail tracks in real time in the entire network and identify wildfire risks and other risks. So there's three components to this, very much, as I said, for wildfire risk or flood risk prevention and detection. Before, we can help with predictive maintenance ahead of the wildfire season. During a crisis, we can help with the management of a wildfire event. And after a wildfire takes place, we can assist again with the analysis, damage assessment, repairs, and lessons learned to prepare for the next event. So that's one. The next one I would like to highlight is our monitoring of gas, the gas sector, and particularly the LNG industry, which is so critical today in the situation we're in Europe with Russian exports at a fraction of their historical levels. So we have a platform, again, that tracks the entire LNG supply chain. We start with liquefaction at the point of departure of cargoes. We track the tankers themselves, and we track the regasification as well. This is timely, this is real time. We have daily updates. It's predictive because we can anticipate changes in LNG prices. When we know about a disruption in energy production, we can immediately have a head up on price impacts that are going to happen down the road. We also can predict to a large degree the restart of LNG liquefaction plants after they have been shuttered. We can monitor repair crews and anticipate when they will be back up and running. And it's comprehensive. We track the entire LNG industry as well as the specific facilities that are relevant to Europe. On the next slide. So one example of this is, for example, the Snøhvit LNG liquefaction facility in Hammerfest in Norway, which has been out for extended period of time until it came back earlier this spring. So this is an example of a satellite image where we can see that the train is dark, is inactive, and we see the red dot represents flaring, which is the gas that's not produced through the terminal. On the next slide, we can apply these detections, these daily detections, to track the level of activity in the plant. And this is a historical summary of liquefaction activity at Snøhvit over the years. So you see the long outage that started before 2021 and extended until around mid-year this year. And we see that the plant is now back up and running. This is very significant to assess the amount of supply that can be expected from this key, not the largest facility, but a very relevant facility for Europe, just within the confines of our continent. Next slide. Here, this is a summary, an aggregation of all the activity we've seen around the world in LNG liquefaction. And the interesting takeaway from this slide is that if we compare what's going on this year, 2022, with the pattern of the previous years, we see that normally in the summertime, around June, July, August, that's a season when many plants around the world perform maintenance. And we see that this year, this maintenance has not taken place. You see the yellow line, which is 2022, represent activity this year. Because of the tightness in gas markets, because of the extremely elevated prices in the market, because of the lack of Russian supply that's been disrupted, LNG plants around the world have run at full capacity and have, for the most part, it seems, delayed maintenance. So this is a worrying signal, because whenever maintenance is delayed, typically there's a higher probability of unplanned outages down the road. So this is a concern for this winter, and it would be very important, all the more important, to track activity in real time, because we might see this year, we hope not, but we might see an increased occurrence, increased frequency of unplanned outages and disruptions. The next slide tracks now the activity of cargoes around the world, and what's been very unusual this year has been the increase, the sudden rise in the amount of floating storage around Europe. All the dots here that you see around Spain, around France, around the UK represent LNG tankers that have been sitting idle just off the coast near regasification facility, near receiving terminals. And this high, very unusual high degree of floating storage is a phenomenon that we see sometimes in oil. It's very unusual in gas and LNG. The reason for this is just that the infrastructure in Europe is becoming overwhelmed as we have replaced Russian gas in large part with LNG imports from the US and elsewhere. The storage capacity that we have, that we rely on this winter to meet demand more than usual, is getting overwhelmed, and the receiving capacity at import terminals is also being maxed out. So we have bottlenecks, and we now rely increasingly effectively on tankers to add to our onshore storage capacity. We now store effectively some LNG on offshore tankers near our coasts. Now, the next slide shows you an example of itinerary from a tanker that's moved from the east coast of the US to the UK, and that's been sitting idle and running around in loops just near the coast. But let's move on to the next slide, and I get on to the next use case. The next aspect I wanted to highlight is crude oil monitoring and crude oil inventories. So again, this is very critical because the crude oil inventories is what sets the price. Changes in inventories, in stocks, are the fastest, the most immediate reflection of supply-demand balances. When supply exceeds demand, stocks go up. When demand runs ahead of supply, stocks go down. And it's very important to assess the level of inventories, the level of oil available in terminals for consumers, and that's an indication of any imbalance in the market. That's been very, very important over the last few years, and we've seen unusual events that have created huge swings in inventories around the world that traditional methods of reporting have not been able to shed light on. One example was COVID, when demand was hit by the lockdowns, and you had a huge increase in inventories that tested storing capacity around the world, not just in Europe, but worldwide, and briefly sent prices in negative territory in April of 2020. This is something that we could see in real time and predict. We predicted negative oil prices when this seemed an absurdity, and many people laughed at us at the time, but we saw that with capacity being tested, with bottlenecks appearing in the system, there was a high probability that prices would swing into negative territory. Again, this year, with the impact of the invasion of Ukraine and the reactions of the market, there were widespread expectations at one point that Russian supply would be disrupted on a large scale. We saw immediately with our monitoring of inventories that this was actually not the case, that supply was rerouted but was still available to the market, albeit with more friction and more inefficiencies in the distribution. Next slide. So here is a snapshot of where inventories globally are today. The red line represents onshore crude oil inventories, which we monitor in tanks around the world. We monitor virtually every floating roof tank, which floating roof tanks account for about 94% of storage capacity in the world. So we monitor the vast majority of these tanks, and we track global supply, global inventories this way. The blue line is floating inventories, is oil on the water, which includes both floating storage and oil in transit. What you see is that since the invasion of Ukraine, there's been an increase in oil inventories around the world. There was then, from about May to September, a slight decrease, and then more recently, a rebound in inventories, but we haven't really reached the high of May again yet. On the other hand, the blue line shows a similar trend, but a much faster rebound in the last few weeks, with floating oil on the water levels reaching record levels this year and very, very high levels. What does this represent? That represents that there's a lot of oil being produced and being available in the market, but much of it is increasingly tied up in storage as tankers, particularly tankers holding Russian oil, find it more and more difficult to find a home for their barrels or have to be sent further afield, so more oil is tied up in transit. And this is, you see a sharp increase in this phenomenon just in the last few weeks as the market is preparing for the embargo on Russian crude in Europe, as well as the price cap due to take effect on December 5th. Next slide. So this was the macro level. We can track the level of inventories. We can aggregate data any which way. And one way is obviously by region. Here we track crude oil inventories specifically in Europe. And here we see that the big increase in global inventories that I described in the previous slide actually bypassed Europe for the most part. There was a slight increase in storage in Europe since the invasion of Ukraine, but very much along normal seasonal trends. And we remained until recently below the normal range of the last few years, below where we normally would be. Recently, in the last few weeks, we have been playing catch up, and European stocks have increased, and they're now in the middle of their range. I just put in here the last 3 years, 2021, 2020, which were both unusual years because of COVID, as well as 2019, which is a more normal year. I did not include earlier lines for just the clarity of presentation, but we're pretty much now in the middle of where we are typically at this time of year. On the next slide, the same capacity can apply to looking at specific facilities, of course. So here we monitor refining activity, and in here you see flaring. The red dots here represent flaring at the Fos-sur-Mer refinery in France recently, as it was idled by labor action, by a worker strike. And the result of this strike and strike at other French facilities as well, on the next slide, has been to propel a sharp increase in inventories. This is a satellite snapshot of one of the largest receiving tank farms, receiving terminals, import terminals in Europe, at Le Havre in France. And you see here the green tanks are pretty much full. The orange tanks are not full yet, but you see a high level of utilization of storage capacity, 75%. This is more than usual. And this represents the crude that normally would have been run through refineries that were idled by strike, and that has been increasing just in terminals. On the next slide, what this has caused is a very sharp increase in the level of crude storage in France. So this increase in European storage in the last few weeks that I showed you a couple of slides ago is largely, but not exclusively, due to the sharp increase in French crude inventories as a result of the strike that's gripped the refining industry for the last few weeks. And you see the blue line, the light blue line here, jumping from below the normal range to above the normal range as refineries were shut down and crude just accumulated in tanks. But there were also significant increases in storage in places like Poland, which normally gets a lot of crude from Russia, but has been increasingly depending on other sources. We've seen significant increases in storage at Polish crude tanks around the country, and also, for example, in Rotterdam, which is the biggest tank farm and biggest trading hub in Europe, and one of the biggest crude oil trading centers in the world. Next slide. Finally, what I would like to point out is our methane detection capacity and how this is relevant to European security, European energy security, and climate security. Methane is one of the main drivers of global warming, and it's actually much of the attention of policymakers until recently has focused on carbon. And at the COP21 in Paris, the talk was of carbon. There was almost no discussion at all of methane. Methane has risen to the front of the agenda in the last few years, was a major issue at Glasgow, where the Global Methane Pledge was signed, and we're now heading into Sharm el-Sheikh, where we will assess the progress that's been accomplished, or the lack of progress, perhaps, that's been accomplished since the Glasgow Global Methane Pledge. We monitor super emitters, the largest sources of emissions in the oil and gas and coal industry, again, on a daily basis, worldwide, with some areas where satellites have trouble making detections, like offshore areas, but nevertheless a global coverage. And the next slide.
Mr. Half, just a few more seconds to close the presentation.
That's my last, next one.
Okay.
The next is my last one. So what this shows here is a map of detections. And you can see there's actually very few detections in Europe itself. We have some methane detections in Poland because linked to the coal industry. But most of the methane detections that we make come from sources that supply Europe. So the issue here for Europe is not really domestic methane emissions, but imported emissions. And we see in Russia, for example, these two lines that represent the two pipelines where emissions are being performed on a routine basis as part of pipeline maintenance. That's a practice that could be eliminated, but that still takes place. And you see also in Algeria, a major supplier of Europe for gas, large levels of emissions as well. So these emissions could be eliminated if we proceed with a border adjustment mechanism for carbon and methane. This could be relevant, and it's very important to eliminate these emissions. It can be done. It can be done very quickly, very efficiently. Indeed, that's the fastest way to reduce the footprint that's available today, and that we actually have to implement if we want to comply, deliver on the climate goals, and reduce our carbon footprint as we need to keep climate warming within less than catastrophic levels. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Half, for your insightful presentation. Indeed, we all got an idea on how critical is the role of satellite solutions. We see also a connection between the key messages highlighted by MEP Mandl and your outcomes of concrete use cases. But we will come back to this in our discussion. Now, I would like to run to our next and final speaker, and then we go into the debate. So we have Mr. Albert David Lewandowski. He is the CEO of Magellanic Space Company. And he will share with us concrete cases on energy and transport. A few words from my side to introduce the company. Its mission is to secure critical infrastructure, is a zero trust end-to-end cybersecurity. They provide cybersecurity solutions focused on security data and applications to enable continuity of operation in each part of critical infrastructure. The stage is yours, Mr. Lewandowski.
Hello and welcome. Thank you for having me. And just let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay,
maybe
perfectly.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, perfectly. And well, Antoine, it was great presentation. And I think that, well, it's also a great match, as you already talked about different use cases for using space technology. In our case, we are strictly focused on securing this data information layer. So the whole thing will be about the security of distributed renewable energy sources, and I will also cover the cases regarding strictly the transport. And as it was told, our mission is about securing critical infrastructure by using a simple solution which can be running continuously all the time, and it can defend all kinds of threats which are already happening, mainly because of the current situation. Currently, we are in the accelerator in Star Wars, where we have our opportunity to cooperate with Israel Aerospace Industries, which is quite interesting case as we work in many different industries, which connects exactly the same challenges regarding the security, and that in each case we talk about critical infrastructure. So in our case, we are focused on the space assets, on defense, where we talk also about autonomous vehicles, about energy sector and automotive industry. And when we talk about the energy industry, which is currently the most critical one, we can see rapidly growing number of different threats and cybersecurity incidents. It's really worth mentioning that the biggest problem is not exactly only in the hardware layer, and the two biggest weaknesses of this critical infrastructure are the following. The first thing is legacy system, or for example, the whole software ecosystem in which we have a lot of companies, and there might be some gaps between their connection. And the second problem is regarding all kind of social engineering attacks. So our mission is also to detect any kind of malicious behavior, any kind of threat, and not to analyze this data, but to protect the system before anything wrong can happen. And regarding the incidents and providing some numbers, there is one interesting case which goes with Saudi Aramco, which was caused due to the malware attack. It cost $50 million. Another very interesting and critical case happened in the United States, and that's the case of Delta Montrose Electric Association, because due to the cyber attack, they lost 25 years of historical data. So imagine that, well, you as the company, as the energy provider, you lose all of the historical data. So we talk about rapidly growing threats, and as currently we talk also about more and more complex supply chains. Also, now we have a very difficult political situation. It's the key to be ready, to be prepared for any kind of vulnerabilities, any kind of threats, any kind of attacks. And when we talk about, well, the main threats, the first thing is regarding the complex supply chain. And regarding complex supply chain, we need to talk about hardware, software. From which country do we have hardware? Another thing is regarding the access management, which is, I would say, one of the biggest challenge in each industry of critical infrastructure. And another thing is also about large-scale dynamic infrastructure. Now we use more and more renewable energy sources. We talk about distributed energy sources, and we talk about the real distributed network of vehicle of the transport, which we need to monitor, and we need to act quickly to avoid any kind of dangerous situation. And especially now, it's also a great challenge, and it's a good thing to solve, as we have growing need for energy. We have multi-entities infrastructure in which different countries in the European Union need to cooperate with each other, and we also need to work with some of the legacy applications and infrastructure. As in the critical infrastructure, any kind of modification update is not as simple as, for example, in any kind of e-commerce platform. And regarding the space technology, which can be a great support in this field, I think that we need to remember about two use cases regarding Copernicus. So regarding Earth observation satellite data, Antoine told a lot of great cases. And I would like also tell about using of Galileo system, which is the great solution for providing the timestamp and also the synchronization. Because the thing regarding data and building trust in data, we need to create a kind of digital signature, also with additional information about the timestamp, because then we can verify that all the information which we have in our system, they are verified and we can trust them. Regarding also the use cases for which we can use the space technologies, we can mention about the infrastructure monitoring, which is one of the key things. So the one thing is regarding using Earth observation data for providing a high-level overview of the infrastructure. And the second case is also about using such data for running drones, which can use the Galileo geolocation system to provide very precise location of them. And based on it, in the beginning we have Earth observation data. Based on it, we can have quick insights, and then we can develop a secure shared data repository which we can use for predict future situations. Regarding the Galileo, on which we are very focused on as we use it, the first thing is regarding these timestamps. So we have the addition to the digital signatures that this data was created at this exact time. And another thing which is widely used in these autonomous unmanned vehicles like drones is the geolocation system, and that we can use our European system. It's a crucial thing when we talk about security and also how to work on the future supply chain, also to build the sustainability of local ecosystem. And regarding this Galileo, as I told, the first and the most important thing is regarding timestamping data, so that we can verify that this information was created by this exact device and it wasn't malformed by anyone, and that device itself works correctly with no malicious behavior. And another case is regarding this precise GNSS system, which I think is the key for building stronger position of Europe in the space industry, and also to build its better position in the critical infrastructure. Regarding our solution, we are focused on this distributed autonomous security. So we are focused strictly on managing all the things directly on the edge. So the case is also regarding autonomous vehicles, about connected vehicles, and also regarding securing all kind of different infrastructure, which can be used, for example, for trains, because that's the thing what we do. And regarding also the space, why is space important for it, as we talked? And I think that Antoine provides great use cases from this energy sector, especially from this LNG industry, that space provides us wide open access to a great amount of data, which we can analyze very quickly, and we have almost real-time information about what is happening. So this approach is much more scalable than, for example, deploying or launching another drone. Well, we can use all of these things also to secure the information which we have directly on Earth. And one interesting case study on which currently we are working on is the case for one of the oil and gas company, which currently starts implementing renewable energy production, and later we use this green energy for producing green hydrogen. So with them, we talk about two use cases. The first one is about securing the distributed renewable energy sources, which they use, then timestamping all the data, because based on it, we create the whole data passport. So it's a kind of energy passport with all of the information about the origin of this exact energy and when it was produced, because it's a crucial information for producing green hydrogen. So here we talk mainly about building these autonomous systems, and by using space, well, it's possible to do it at large scale. And as I told, well, we as the Magellanic, we are focused mainly on this, well, securing critical infrastructure and protecting all connected devices in this defensive way. So in fact, to prevent threat, not to solve any kind of the cyber incident after it happens. And well, I think that, well, it's like 10 minutes. So, well, thank you for your attention. And if you have questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. And thank you for your attention.
We thank you very much, Albert, for your very interesting presentation. The great mission of your company. We all heard your activities, and I also like the characterization you used for Copernicus and Galileo Space Guardians. It's a really nice phrase, and we can use it as well.
Yeah, that's right, for sure.
Okay. I think we heard all presentations, and listening to your presentations, I think we all share a common agreement that cyber attacks is an emerging threat. in all sectors, but also especially on in energy and transport. Yesterday, I was reading a few statistics on cyber attacks, and they are doubling every year, year after year. There are cyber attacks on hospital, healthcare, cyber attacks also in transport. And we have the recent example in US where there was a chaos catastrophe in local and state transportation systems because of the cyber threats. And my question to the three of you, from the side of the private sector and from the side of the EU institutions, the European Parliament in this case, is the following. Is Europe prepared for that? Do you see the role of cyber attacks as an important threat in energy and transport infrastructure, and what we can do more to tackle this from the side of the private sector and also from the side of the EU? Maybe I will give first the floor to the private sector, to Mr. Half or Mr. Lewandowski. You may, one of you can.
So let me start. So I
or
think
both
that
of you, of course.
that's right. Yeah, we can try simultaneously, and I think that. In current situation, more and more companies are aware of the cybersecurity, because the biggest challenge regarding the cybersecurity is regarding the education, because, well, we know that we should be secure. That's all. But because of the war in the Ukraine, I think that the whole awareness about the cybersecurity, about the cyber threats, well, now they are understood by the companies. So I think that currently we are in this stage of implementing these solutions, and I think that Europe is ready for it. But still, in the cybersecurity, I think that we talk about constant fight. So it's not about, well, developing one solution and, well, then that's the end. As we talked about also a lot of different initiatives, like, for example, GovSatcom, so creating this secure communication. So I think that there are already great actions. And in Europe, well, we have a lot of companies, we have great engineers, great people who can implement these solutions. So now it's mainly about the implementation and also working in more agile way to do it as fast as it's possible. And regarding the impact of the energy infrastructure, I think that, well, that's for sure. And one interesting case is regarding the telecommunications satellite, as there was this cyber attack in February 2022 to the Viasat satellite, which caused, well, losing the telecommunication. So, like, imagine that you are not able to call to anyone, or, for example, use the navigation in your phone.
Very good example, Albert.
Yeah, so that's the real threat, well, which we can observe, and exactly the same thing can happen in the energy industry. And in energy industry, well, we talk about, on the one hand, about cyber threats, and on the other hand, more about this, well, hardware challenges and direct attacks.
Yeah, very good points. I don't have that much to add to what David just said. But maybe one additional comment is, we obviously, the industry is taking many steps to strengthen and make its preparedness for attacks more robust. But one aspect is that attacks do happen, and sometimes there are weaknesses there's a weak link, and we have seen attacks happen. We've seen, for example, in the US, a key product pipeline to the East Coast that's been disabled for a while when it was under attack. So that makes it all the more important for the entire system to cope with this, to have real-time information on the system as a whole. And in the case of the US, for example, it was very useful to be able to assess the level of supply available and demand and the market response, so that the market could respond, traders could arbitrage the situation and smooth the disrupting impact on the economy as a whole and on the infrastructure as a whole.
Very good point, Mr. Half. And we see, we are emphasizing this a lot, and we highlight a lot that the use of space is a solution across many sectors, and we see that even more now with cybercrime and cyber attacks. MEP Mandel, maybe you would like to add a few comments. Also, to continue my question, if Europe is prepared for that, also compared to the global actors, because there are also at the global stage there are many initiatives taking on with respect on that.
Well, it's a very good question, and thanks for the opportunity to share a view on that. For me, in the end of this discussion, because I have to leave in a few minutes, a wise person once said, Europe is taking care more of privacy, and the United States would take care more of security. I guess our European approach to privacy is a good one, and we are setting standards on this planet. And most of it is good, what we provide the Earth with and what we create as structures in terms of privacy within our continent. But we are not yet there when it comes to security. In the first place, it is about awareness. I guess we have to keep the awareness up in our societies about the importance of security in all these fields. As mentioned before, we also have to strengthen the confidence into the state as an actor when it comes to combat these threats. Especially for threats, especially when it comes to transport and infrastructure, what you have emphasized. We have seen a few weeks ago these suspicious activities around the German railway system, for example. We see a huge discussion, which is not yet over, in my view, on the takeover, partly at least 24.9% of the Hamburg port. So we have to holistically see the business opportunities, but we also have to see the security dimension of things. As you know, the European Strategic Compass calls China the elephant in the room, a strategic partner, an economic competitor, and as well a systemic rival. And all the three things are true, I guess. All the three things have to be seen at the same time in order to take proper and adequate decisions. And this is what we have to work on, awareness, what it means to have a systemic rival within our structure, but also what it would mean if we would not do business with them. It would be harmful for each and every side, and also what it would mean not to see this huge power which we do business with as a competitor as well on a global scale. I don't want to change the topic of this discussion to China. Of course, we have different issues today as well, but it's good for all of us if we keep on mind on nearly each and every agenda of policy making today the increasing influence of China all over the world, which is the huge difference to the one of the Putin-Russia Federation, which is decreasing in each and every regard and will be defeated, that's I'm sure of, but that's a completely different issue, completely different means and measures, irrationality in Russia versus rationality in China. So let's also focus on this, and let's understand in this regard why it's so important to make our critical infrastructure more resilient.
Thank you very much, MEP Madl, for your valuable comments. It's also for us nice to learn. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for staying with us till the end. Thank you so much. Okay. Do we have any more comments? Because I'm not able to see the chat. Something to add on the views of MEP Madl, Mr. Lewandowski and Mr. Half before we close the session?
Well, the only thing I would add, is it's very hard to overestimate the impact of China in the global economy, and we see it in everything that we measure. There's been huge swings in Chinese supply and demand. The lockdowns have had a big impact on the energy markets, for example. That's been kind of a savior for Europe in recent months as demand from China has dropped, and that's enabled us to fill up our gas storage more than we expected. But having transparency on what's going on in China in terms of energy use, energy consumption, emissions is obviously critical to predict, to understand, to manage the market as a whole, to deal also with the climate challenge. We will not solve the climate issue without China. So transparency is key, and cooperation with China, despite all the strategic issues we may have, is also essential.
Thank you, Mr. Half. Something, a last line from you, Albert?
I think that, well, I will not repeat the same thing regarding the China. So I think that, well, now it's time to take action, especially that I think that, well, it's the right moment to implement all kind of policies regarding the security aspect of the critical infrastructure. So yeah, I think that, well, it's time to take action.
Yes, and actually it's now more than ever that we see how global challenges also have an impact, not only at a national, but at a regional and local level from now on. So,
and we have also the Cyber Resiliency Digital Act, which I think it will be also a good thing for further development of this sector.
thank you so much for your participation, Mr. Lewandowski and Mr. Half. I would also like to thank all participants who joined the webinar. I know we have loyal followers, but we also have new ones, and therefore I have to make an introduction of the directive in the beginning. Thanks again to the speakers for their tailor-made presentations. As usual, there will be a follow-up of the event in the next days, and the recording of the webinar. If you have more questions, you may contact with us and with the speakers. Please don't forget, and maybe Cornel already. I think I will give the stage to Cornel to share a few words on our next webinar, and then I will say my final greetings to you.
Perfect. Yeah, so I just shared here in the chat the link for the next session in November, which is going to be on wastewater and drinking water. So if you already want to register for that one, it's available there. And with that, also from my side, thanks to all the speakers. And actually, this is my last day at Eurisi, so yeah, congratulations. And I just hope for the best for the rest of this series. It has been a pleasure to work on this together. And so the next session will be hosted from the Eurisi side, and I think. I'm sure you will be in good hands with my colleagues. So have a good continuation of the series, and thanks all for joining us.
Thank you very much, and wish you a nice day. Have a nice day. Thank you so much for attending.